The third part of this lecture looks at water distribution in South Florida specifically, and the effects of urbanization on water quality and where the actual water is. So if we look at slide 15 in the PowerPoint, it shows two very distinct pictures. The one on the left is the traditional flow of water originating from the area near Disney World in the Kissimmee River, which drains into Lake Okeechobee. As that lake fills up, the southern banks overflow, and that water is traveling down towards Florida Bay, slowly being filtered by all the swamps along the way. So the Big Cypress National Preserve swamp and then the Everglades filter out the contaminants from the lake and from the water, eventually releasing really fresh water into Florida Bay and then into the Florida Keys. In the 1960s, the Army Corps of Engineers has significantly modified the flow of water in South Florida by creating a series of canals and channels. The biggest, of course, is the Caloosahatchee River, which is not actually a river. It's a man-made canal going to the west and arriving here in Fort Myers. The east side of Florida gets the St. Lucie River. So we've diverted water to the east and to the west. And there's a series of canals on the southeast side of the peninsula towards Miami that essentially shoot the water out into the ocean and into the Gulf very, very fast. So we've effectively changed the timing at which that water reaches the coast, which is really important because that water no longer has the time to percolate into the soil. So we're not recharging the groundwater and the aquifer system, and we're not removing the pollutants in these water bodies because we want the water off of the landscape because we've developed it. These are places where we live and we don't want them flooded. So we've created these man-made systems. Now this creates things, or at least contributes to things that I'm sure you've heard of, like red tide or blue-green algae blooms off of the coast. We have a massive water quality issue here in South Florida, and it's mainly due to this effective urbanization, or the way that we've modified the flow of water on our landscape. So we're now going back in, 50 years later, filling in these canals in order to restore sheet flow to what you see on the left-hand side, which is the natural way that water flows evenly across South Florida. And by doing that, we're hoping to improve water quality, which we know is contributing at least to some degree, and the red tide blooms that are originating offshore. So we're feeding them extra nutrients in the water, particularly nitrogen and phosphorus, as much of the area around the lake is farmland. And we know that farmland is using pesticides and fertilizers to irrigate their crops, to make them grow nice and strong, but also releasing chemicals into the water, which would naturally be filtered out. But because we've urbanized South Florida, we're just shooting that really dirty water now down the Caloosahatchee, for instance, and it's hitting Sanibel and Captiva Island and creating massive water quality issues here on our coast. Saltwater intrusion is also occurring as well. In addition to reef damage in the Florida Keys, as the water that's entering the south tip of Florida is much dirtier than it traditionally was. So we're also causing reef die-off as well. So these are a number of really bad environmental consequences of creating these channels and diverting water off of the landscape much faster.